Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I used to kind of think of this title of this show as like you're going down a straight road, and then there are all these twists and turns you can make. And we make some pretty interesting twists and turns, and we've got one for you today. So I'm one of your hosts, Dan Hall, coming to you from Olympia, Washington, and my friend and co-host Gwen Farrell is coming to us from Phoenix, Arizona, and she's going to introduce our guest. Hi, Gwen.
Hi, Dan. How's it going?
Okay.
Good, good. Well, hi, everybody. Happy to be here today, and we have a remarkable guest with us. So, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about his amazing experiences and background, and then we've been looking forward to hearing him talk about some things. So our guest today, Howard Batie, is a retired U.S. naval officer, a retired satellite communications system manager, community college instructor, and is the author of books on hypnotherapy and metaphysics, including Healing Body, Mind, and Spirit, a guide to energy-based healing, The ETs Speak, Who We Are and Why We're Here, and The Art of Metaphysical Communications, Conversations with the Other Side, all that are available on Amazon.com, and videos on his YouTube channel. As director of the Evergreen Healing Arts Center in Chehalis, Washington, he provided Reiki, healing touch, hypnotherapy, and assisted individuals to meet and converse with higher dimensional beings. In 2015, he had a near-death experience that changed his life radically, which I hope he is going to share with us today. Howard Batie, welcome to Anomalies.
Welcome, Howard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel and Gwen. Well, I'd like to start off with a little background on some of my anomalies that I've experienced several anomalies, or what some people call spiritually transforming experiences in my life. But a couple that stand out, I'd like to go over them first before I go into my near-death experience, to kind of give you a feel for my association with the other side. When I was about 8 or 9, I was playing with my toys in my bedroom, and I heard a man say very clearly, "Howard, now that you're here, you'd better figure out how all this works." I turned around and there was nobody there. I thought that was very curious, but I didn't understand it, so I just went on playing with my toys, and that was it. And later, when I went to the University of Washington, I was enrolled in the electrical engineering program, and very heavily the sciences and mathematics, very left brain stuff. But at one point, I was required to take a humanities course. Didn't want to, but that was part of what my requirements to kind of round out my personality, so they said. Well, anyway, the humanities instructor had a kind of a curious way of conducting his class. He didn't give any tests or examinations except the final exam. So we went along, and I attended some of the classes. I wasn't really interested in any of it, but for some reason, he was very enamored with a Norwegian playwright called Henrik Ibsen. And in 1867, he wrote a 5-act play called Peer Gynt. And when it came time for the final exam, he said, "Well, now I want you to tell me all about this Peer Gynt, who the main characters were, their interrelationships, their personalities, their issues, their agendas. Describe to me what this play means to you. And boy, I hadn't paid any attention to this humanities class at all during the entire course. I was sunk. I knew it. I didn't have any idea what this play was about or had never read anything about it. And at that time, we had what's called a blue book, little college blue books that have lined pages that are completely blank. And he said, open up your blue book and tell me all about it. Write it down. That's your final exam. And I said, oh my God, I'm sunk for sure. I'm going to flunk this one. So I opened it up and began writing, Peer Gynt is, and then I went blank. I couldn't think of anything. And then pretty soon I noticed with a lot of curiosity that my hand was still going. And I didn't understand what it was doing, but it was scribbling stuff in this book. And the next thing I was aware of, I was on the very last page, and the bell rang. Time's up. Put your pencils down, hand them in. And I said, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here. And this is a disaster. Well, turned out when I got it back, it had an A at the top of the page. That was my grade. It wasn't until much later in life I even heard about automatic writing, but I guess that's the only explanation that I have that could have explained what happened there. Anyway, I passed it, went on and finished the rest of my courses. So many other instances like that happened in my lifetime. But I think one of the important things we have to learn is to pay attention to the anomalies that happen in everyone's lifetime and try to connect the dots. Coming back to what I was told when I was 8 years old, I have to figure this out. Well, these little anomalies kept happening. Like once when I began my Reiki training, I didn't know what it was, never had heard about it before. And I was introduced to a Reiki master, and I said, what is Reiki? And she said, well, I can't tell you what it is, but I can show you. So she put me on the little portable massage table and gave me an impromptu 15-minute Reiki sample session. As soon as she put her hands on my abdomen, it felt really hot, like there was something really hot there. I felt the heat. And then I had a feeling in my stomach or abdomen like something was twisting around. I felt the physical sensations of a twisting motion internally. And at the same time, I had a vision of a long hawser, you know, the lines that they tie ships up with. It had a knot in it, and this knot came undone and straightened out. Well, after that Reiki sample session was over, I said, well, that was very curious. I told her all about it, what I felt. And I said, what was the meaning of all that? She said, I didn't know. I don't know. I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything. What does it mean to you? Well, I couldn't answer that. So I figured the only way I could connect that dot was to learn Reiki and start practicing it, using it. And so that's what started my little healing third career, actually. Later on, about a year later, I became certified as a hypnotherapist. And I concentrated primarily on past life regression because I found that was the easiest and simplest way and the most effective way to help others with their emotional problems, anxieties, stress, pain, whatever. And my past life regression sessions turned later into spiritual regression at the end of each past life. Instead of bringing them back awake, I said, well, now that you're in this past life, go through the death scene, but take you up to the death scene in that lifetime and tell me what happened. And they described their transition from physical into the spiritual world. And eventually, with a lot of training, I was trained later in Michael Newton's Life Between Lives hypnotherapy course. Once I took my clients into the spiritual world, I started to explore that area and find out what their consciousness, their soul did after their physical body had died and they transitioned back to the spiritual world. Well, I did this on my with my hypnotherapy clients, and at one point, I think it was 2010 or something like that, it was my actual clients who said, we would like to get together and share what we have experienced. So I said, yeah, that's a good idea. And I formed what we collectively called a spiritual discussion group, where we could share in a very safe space the things that we had individually experienced. Well, as it turns out, I had about 20 of my students, clients, in this original spiritual discussion group. And about 8 of them were able to really clearly describe their spiritual experiences. And actually, I began training them to become channels for questions that I could provide as the hypnotherapist. I take my clients into a very highly altered state of awareness. I would remain conscious, but my channel would be hypnotized very deeply, and actually their awareness was that of the spiritual area, the non-physical world that they were in at that time. And we did a lot of exploration. I trained about 8 channels that I could reliably count on their accuracy. So those 8 channels became what I call the spiritual research group, where we started exploring the spiritual area and meeting other spiritual beings. And those beings included, well, initially the higher self of the channel and the spirit guide of the channel, and then ascended masters and archangels, and really virtually any spiritual being that we wish to call forward. If they were willing to talk with us, they'd come forward and we'd have a conversation with them. And in the course of several of these discussions, channeling sessions, we actually met with several extraterrestrials or representatives from several, I think there was a total of 6 different extraterrestrial civilizations. And we had at least an hour-long conversation with at least 2 representatives from each of these 12 channels. And that formed the basis of one of the books that I've written called The ETs Speak. But that gives you a little bit of background about my my introduction to the spiritual world and listening to the anomalies that come up in my life. And I have a great curiosity and I just want to know more about that. So I started exploring. Long in April of 2015, April 30th, I was sitting at home and I went down my steep, very steep, 150-foot long driveway to get the mail and got the mail. And as I started to go back up, I got very dizzy, very nauseous. And I said, uh-oh, here I am I was about 75 at the time. And I said, uh-oh, am I having a heart attack? I better calm myself down. So with my hypnotherapeutic training, I did the calming tool. I had a hypnotic calming tool that I taught my clients. So I used it on myself. Put a couple of fingers together and said that magic keyword that I taught my clients. And it calmed me down too. So slowly but surely, I inched back up the driveway using my calming tools, asking the angels to help me out. And eventually, my wife was not at home at the time. So I got in my car and I drove to the emergency room, calmly walked up to the reception desk there and said, "Excuse me, I believe I'm having some of the signs of congestive heart failure. Can you check me out?" Well, that congestive heart failure must have been some kind of a medical code word. Boy, red lights went off and bells were ringing and nurses flew out of the triage room and plunked me down in a wheelchair and brought me into the EKG room and plastered my chest with a whole bunch of electrodes. And pretty soon the doctor came in, looked at the EKG strip and said, "Admit this guy right now." So evidently it was a little worse than I thought. So I got in, called my wife, let her know where I was, and she came over right away. But the next day, they decided that they'd send a stent up one of the arteries in my leg to inspect my heart, see what was going on, and they were trying to see if just a stent would be appropriate to correct the problem. I got in there and determined that I needed more than a stent. I needed a three-way bypass. So a couple of days later, I was transferred to the hospital in Olympia, St. Peter's. And they informed me that, yeah, we'll keep you sedated for a while, but there's no surgeon available until Monday. Okay. This was the weekend. So I guess it doesn't matter what I have, that you got to work on the doctor's schedule. So Monday came around. They gave me some more sedatives, prepared me for the surgery. And as I was going into the operating room, I was still on this gurney that they were wheeling me through the hospital on. And as we were going into the operating room, I asked one of the nurses there what time it was, because I was curious how long this was going to take. And they said, "Well, it's 10:30 in the morning. May the 4th be with you." Well, I smiled at that because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Trekkie. And the next thing I was aware of was I was looking down through a hole in the ceiling. It was an irregular shaped hole, not a circle, but irregular shaped, looking down, watching this operation on this body below, my body. And I could hear the soft music in the background, and the nurses were chatting with the surgeon, and the surgeon say, "Give me this instrument," and I could hear the clanking and stuff in the instrument trays. Very curious, interested, watching this operation. And then I felt something change in the back of my head. It was like a shift in the energies there. And then at that time, I knew I had a stroke. Somehow, didn't know what the extent of it was or anything else. But the surgeon said, "Well, I've got those 3 done, but there's there's another one back here that's 85% blocked. I'm going to do another graft on that." And at the next thing that I was aware of was I was aware that there was somebody standing beside me, or behind me, actually. And I turned around and looked at this being. He appeared to be a man about 45 or 50, middle-aged, dressed in white, white shirt, white coat, white tie, white pants. Strangely, he didn't have any feet or below the knees. But then I looked down and said, "Hey, neither do I. That's strange." Well, anyway, then this being that I just called the greeter, didn't know what else to call him. So I just called him a greeter because he was there greeting me. And he said, "Howard, you have a choice. You can you can return to your body, but you know it will be somewhat impaired, or you can come home with me. What is your choice?" Well, that was completely new to me. I didn't know I had a choice, but now I was faced with having to make the most important choice of my entire life. I dithered around wondering, what do I do? What do I do? And I thought of my wife. And I didn't want to leave her, but there was something else I had to do. And at that point, I was also aware that I was dithering, wondering what I would choose. I could see myself and myself talking to the greeter. That's kind of odd. How can I see me over there? The me that's talking to the greeter, the me that's seeing my body below. Well, that's very strange. But I knew I had to make a choice. Well, obviously, I made the choice to come back. Didn't know why I still had something to do or what it was. But that's why I made my choice. And the next thing that I was aware of, I was waking up from the anesthesia and began checking my body. Left hand, yeah, works great. Left foot, yep, works great. Right hand, not so much. Right foot, oops, doesn't work at all. And so I called for the nurse. Actually, my wife was right there, and she called for the nurse and said he's had a stroke. Well, that set off, that must be code words in the hospital, because they started the stroke protocol right away. And during my recuperation, I spent 2 weeks in the hospital learning to walk again. My voice was very slurred. I was learning to talk again. And then following that, I was released from the hospital and spent another 6 weeks with physical therapy as an outpatient. My legs didn't return to normal. I still have, I can walk about, maybe 10 or 15 feet before I have to sit down. My legs just don't support me anymore. And the other thing that affected me is my voice was very affected. It's recovered somewhat since 2015 when this happened. But at the time, my voice hadn't recovered very much at all. And I was, as a hypnotherapist, your voice is the only tool of your trade. So I was forced to close my office at that point. But I was still wondering what part of me was observing my body below, was talking to the greeter, and what part of me observed me dithering, wondering, looking at me and the greeter. So after I recovered, I went back and got my spiritual research group, my trained channels, and started investigating this particular experience that I had had. My conscious conversation with the channel was with my higher self. She was channeling my higher self, who chose to call himself Artumid. So that was my higher self's name. So with the assistance of my trained channels, I interviewed the entire experience again. And as a result of that channeling and learning more about what was said and who said it and why, I learned 5 important things. The first was that death is nothing to fear. Basically, we only fear what we don't know. And our conscious mind doesn't know death. Our soul does, but our conscious mind doesn't. Our conscious mind knows what we have experienced through our 5 physical senses. That's the contents of your memories, your conscious memories. Well, since I hadn't died before, I didn't have any knowledge of death, but I learned that there's nothing to fear. It will not be the end of my consciousness. The second thing that I learned, that my future graduation, whenever that happens, it'll be, as they explained to me, it'll be more like moving from a darkly lit room to a very large, well-lit room filled with love, peace, and unimaginable joy, just like I've done many, many times before. The third thing that I learned from that experience is that my greeter is a spiritual being who escorts home those souls whose body has died and there's no hope of reviving them. Suicide or tragedy, a traumatic death, or just at the end of life, when the body has become so worn out that it couldn't sustain itself anymore. So this greeter, he calls himself a guide, a spiritual tour guide. He helps people who are in the process of transitioning back to the spiritual world to readjust to the greater reality of their spiritual and energetic being. Okay. I learned something else. Not all people, but many people do have exit points that they've pre-programmed in before they incarnate into a physical body. They have pre-chosen exit points where their higher self would have the choice of returning home or extending their physical lifetime, so that they would exit at some future exit point. And the fifth thing that I learned was, what are these different parts of me that were involved in this experience? My fifth dimensional higher self, the third dimensional body, was on the operating table. My fifth dimensional body, my higher self, was looking down, watching that third dimensional body on the operating table. And then an even higher aspect of my soul was watching me dither while I was trying to decide what to do. So now I understand what being multidimensional really means. It's just different aspects of your total soul being that I can simultaneously exist in more than one dimension of consciousness at the same time. Right now, our third dimensional brain normally doesn't have access to the fifth dimensional higher self. But in hypnosis, we can access the higher self soul memories. That's where past life information comes from this aspect, higher dimensional aspect of yourself. So I'd like to give you an excerpt of the conversation that I had with my higher self to explain all this. I asked first, I was talking to the channel who was relaying my information to my higher self. In other situations, I can talk to the channel, and the channel might be in contact with another extraterrestrial being or archangel or ascended master or whatever. In this case, she was in contact with my own higher self. And I asked Artumid, I'm reviewing the process that I went through and the images that I received during my heart bypass operation. And I still have some questions. First, during my heart operation, did my heart stop? And Artumid replied, for a little while, yes. It stopped on its own. But the physician felt he was in control and was not concerned. He knew he could, quote, bring it back. There is a time or a space in which the body physically functions, even though the heart has quit. And as long as the body is cared for and assisted to receive oxygen, it can maintain life for a little while without the heart. Your surgeon was aware that it had stopped, but was able to quickly get it re-beating again by squeezing it to trigger the heart to move again. I said, good. During that time when my heart stopped, I became aware of what I call an out-of-body experience. After I woke up, I remembered looking down through the ceiling and watching my physical body on the table. Artumid replied, yes, Michael, who's my spirit guide, Michael and I are both letting you know that you could soon reach a point where you would have a choice, and that your brain had suffered, but it was not beyond repair. And you would be given a choice to come back to a body that would take a lot of work and a lot of dedication to bring back, but it was your soul's choice. You think of it as out of body, but you were there because you were at a juncture, a point of choice. And then I asked, I became aware of a man who looked to be physical, dressed in white pants, white shirt. Who was that being that appeared in my mind? And Artumid replied through the channel, he was there to accompany you if you chose to leave your body behind. He's one whom you know on the other side and has volunteered to assist you when you do decide to move on. He's what you may think of as a tour guide. and he's
Okay.
there waiting and observing on the other side. He does this for many souls, and this is his specialty. And you, as you make the transition, he's there to guide you forward without fear. I said, all right. Now, during this out-of-body experience, he asked me a question. What do you choose to do? Return to the body or come home with me? Is this the choice that's given to everyone who's in the process of transitioning? And Artumid replied, only to those whose physical body can be returned to. There are those to whom the body has been damaged or has aged to the point that it cannot be repaired. But your body can sustain you longer, and you wish to return to do further work, so you may return, and that is the choice you were given. Then I asked, during this experience with the greeter, I was also aware that I was standing behind the greeter, off to his left. Behind him, I was observing the other me who was looking down at my body. What part of my consciousness was standing behind the greeter, observing this other me? Artumid replied, you've been introduced to what is meant by multidimensionality, or the ability to observe from many different perspectives. The you that was watching the body closely was the part of the soul essence that is deeply embedded into the physical body and is used to maintain and control and be within that body. That part is the higher self part of your consciousness that simply observes. It's not physical, and it's the part that was with the being you call the greeter. So they were all parts of you, but from different perspectives of your soul. You think of me, Artumid, as your higher self, so to speak. I represent that bridge between embodiment in the physical and a soul in the etheric, the higher world of non-physicality. The higher self moves back and forth between your physical body and your soul. So the higher self, yes, is observing, but was also still highly attached to the physical, as well as highly attached to the superconscious part of you that is non-physical, your soul. The higher self is essentially your internal guidance system, that part of you which can really help you decide what works best for you. And I asked, so that was you then? Artumid said, yes, Michael, my guide, Michael and I together, because as your guide, Michael is always there and available. But when you were in such crisis, he was very close to you, and I was with him. You have heard from other channels that once you are in the higher dimensions, you don't have a name, but are recognized by your vibration or your light frequency. You as a soul are extended into Artumid, which is represented in physicality as Howard. Took me a while to get my mind around all that, but I think I've connected a few dots. I then asked, my linear brain is trying to equate my physical body as third dimensional Artumid is my fifth dimensional higher self. And this other part of my consciousness is higher, seventh, eighth, or whatever. Does that make sense? Artumid responded, yes, that's exactly how it is. You mentioned earlier the differences in dimensions, and it's easier to understand from that perspective of that part of your consciousness or soul. It's able to represent itself in more than one dimension of consciousness, and it can simultaneously access more than one dimension. Now, when I've learned also that when spiritual beings speak of dimensions, it's not like height, width, and depth or breadth. To the spiritual world and spiritual beings, dimensions, the different dimensions are different states of awareness, states of consciousness. Like, for example, Archangel Michael, in a different channeling, has explained to us that third dimensional has many levels. The lower levels, some of the dimensions or states of consciousness are hate, greed, jealousy, thievery, what's in it for me? The higher levels of third dimension, higher frequency levels of third dimension, are cooperation, not competition. It's cooperation, joy, happiness, positivity, and joy, things like that. So back to what Artumid was saying, it isn't just a step by step, but more an expansion outward in waves, like one frequency moving into and blending with higher frequencies. I am you, and I am that part of you that is your best friend. That's closest to knowing who and what you really are and how you really serve. You're one of those who has memories of having been emotionally separated from your physical body, the out-of-body experience, but yet still able to return to it. And it's good to share with others so that it calms the fears of those who are unsure about what happens when one transitions. It helps for others to understand that it is not the end, merely a change, or in truth, a movement forward.
Howard,
And
I
I
wonder
asked, go ahead.
well, I'm just wondering if we could take a time to ask you some questions about this. Would that be okay? Because you
Please
just
do. Absolutely.
generated a bazillion questions in my mind. But I'm going to let Gwen go
Okay.
first. Gwen, do you
Oh,
have something?
okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the interesting sharing and a lot of things to think about. I do have a question, and that is a couple, but the one I'll start with is as a hypnotherapist myself, I do understand of processes that people can go through in hypnosis, and that there can be various influences on individuals when they're going through these things. And
Yes.
so my question is, you mentioned that the I guess clients or students of yours or people who you were working with, um, you were able to use the ones, and you used I think the term, the ones who were seemed to be the most accurate in the information they were able to relay. Those are the ones that you
Yes.
tended to work with more. So my question is this: understanding how hypnosis works with people and the human mind works, and how it's frequently very difficult to know if things are accurate, how were you able to know the information was accurate that was coming through?
Well, in my channeling sessions, I always use 4 levels of testing to determine the validity of the information that I'm receiving. The first is, how do I know that I'm really connected to a being of light instead of a trickster or deceiver? And my guide has taught me, and I teach my students, uh, the process of challenging every being that we meet or converse with in this higher state, expanded state of awareness. The first challenge, let's say you're doing a past life regression, and you take your client into what they say is a past life. And the first thing I do is ask them, how does this being appear to you? Let's say, for instance, he appears as a farmer in bib overalls. Okay. regardless of who or what you meet in a past life regression or hypnotic regression, the first challenge that I would give in this case is, being in bib overalls, are you in service to the light and love of the one infinite creator? Yes or no? Give them no other choice. If they don't say yes immediately, they're a trickster or somebody that you don't want to deal with, an imposter, perhaps. It's not the person that you called forward. So you banish them, that being, by saying, farmer in bib overalls, in the name of the Creator, I hereby command you to leave my presence immediately and permanently. So be it. And they always do. Now, about a third of my past life regression clients have had imposters initially show up. They're not the person that was called or the being that was called. And we go through this challenge and banishment process. If they do say that they are in service to the light and love of the one infinite creator, challenge them again. Are you the being that I've called forward? For instance, if you were wanting to channel information from Archangel Michael, you say, are you in fact Archangel Michael, the being that I called forward? Yes or no? And if they say no, well, you've already established that they're in service to the light. So you can safely communicate or converse with this being. They might be another guide or a person with additional information. What do you have a message that you would like to give that's pertinent to this conversation? Yes or no? If they do, let them speak. If not, say thank you for coming, and then call again for whom you initially called forward. That's the first step. You have to be sure of the source of the information that you're channeling, or that is being channeled, the information that's being channeled. The second thing is, how can you, this is kind of a subjective determination, but over a number of channeling sessions, can you be sure that the channel is not providing biased or prejudiced information? Or is there clarity? Can their clarity be relied on? And that can only be determined through repetitive channeling sessions. So out of those initial 20 that had past life regressions that wanted to do channeling work, only 8 were selected as being what I call clear channels. Well, the third test of validity is, can I, as the director, the conscious director of this channeling session, can I be sure that my own prejudices and biases are not getting in the way of new information that I'm receiving? And I have to really trust myself on that one. The fourth method of step in this validation process is, can the information that's being received from the trusted source, can that be corroborated from other sources? So this is the process that I used when I was channeling the extraterrestrial civilizations. I'd always get more than one channeling session from each civilization, and always from a different source in that civilization. For instance, 2 different Pleiadians working through different channels And if the channeled information from different sources within that civilization, if that information doesn't conflict, but supports, then there's more of a verification. I can rely on the validity of the information to a greater extent. So
That's
does that
fascinating.
answer the...
Yes, and I think it's very helpful for people to be aware of, because there are many people who want information, need information, and not all people who are teaching I'm not going to say the right way, because it's not my call to judge whether anybody's doing something right or not. But I do believe there are things that you have outlined that need to be considered, that people need to be using. There are steps that need to be be covered, to be done each time.
Yes.
And so that important that you get good information, and also to protect yourself, and other people you may be working with. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate how you're doing that. Thank you very much for explaining that. Dan,
Yeah,
you have some
right.
questions?
Well,
I just wanted to jump in and say all the information that I just provided is also provided in the books that I've written. So it's documented in my books. Okay. Daniel,
Yes,
you had a
thank you.
question?
Well, I kind of want to go in a little different direction. We've had a guest on before. Are you familiar with Joanne DiMaggio? Heard that name before?
No.
She's
No.
a past life regressionist. And the first question that comes to my mind is, I'm guessing we've all had past lives. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes.
How many? Or are there, is there an average, or does that just go out ad infinitum?
There's no accurate answer, because everyone has their own soul's growth, and each soul will choose to incarnate for lessons that they still need to learn. A very wise soul as a beginner doesn't need very many incarnations. A very newbie soul may need a number of incarnations. And also, the number of incarnations varies in another respect also. Earth is not the only place that you can incarnate to obtain soul growth and further evolution of the soul. So many of the people here on Earth have incarnated also on other worlds, other civilizations. And what we've been told, and I have no reason to refute it, is that the souls on Earth have been offered the opportunity to come to Earth, but it's a very challenging place to be as a soul, because there's so much negativity here. In fact, Earth, they've said Earth is the worst place to, in terms of the chaos and the fear and the hate and the war and everything, it's more warlike than any other place in the universe. So only those souls who have already demonstrated that they're able to handle terrific challenges are allowed to incarnate here. So
should we feel good about
the
that?
answer, yes, you can congratulate yourself
having
that you
survived
are
this
among the
place.
chosen to incarnate here. But this is probably the last place that your soul will need to incarnate, because all the other places that you've incarnated, other worlds perhaps, have been leading up to this final challenge. So
The other,
the answer to your original question is there is no answer. There's
Yeah.
no single answer. It depends on what's needed for the soul's growth. That's
Yeah.
the only purpose for incarnation in the first place.
That's what Joanne talks about, these soul contracts that we make. We come here to learn lessons, so we could have as
Mhm.
many reincarnations as we need to learn lessons. Would that be fair to say?
Well, soul contracts, I think, are a little different.
Okay, talk
Soul
about that.
Now I'm relying now on my Life Between Lives training, and my own experience with many people that have experienced past lives as well. Before we incarnate, we come here to balance what needs to be balanced, to learn what's needed to learn for you. So before we incarnate, we meet with our soul group and our soul council or spirit council or whatever you want to, wise guides and mentors that will help you determine what lessons you want to learn in the next incarnation. For instance, if you've for, for just for example, you might want to learn the lesson of loneliness, because for some reason your soul needs still to learn that lesson. So you choose a lifetime that will let you learn that lesson. You get to preview the mother and the father, the family, and the physical group, the community that you will incarnate into. And you get to preview several different ones, and you choose the one that you prefer to learn that lesson in before incarnation. And actual incarnation normally happens, that is, when the soul energy reduces to the higher self energy and attaches to the physical body's nervous system at about the 4th or 5th month of, of gestation. So
Interesting stuff. Gwen, do you have something else?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask about two beings that you mentioned when you were telling us about your life experiences. And first of all, you mentioned as a child, you were in the presence of a male being who was dressed in white, who told you basically, get busy. It's time to get on with your life, to learn something of that nature. Then you mentioned when you had the near-death experience, if you want to talk at that, call it that, or out of body, the greeter. Sounds like a lot like the same being. Do you think that it was the same being, or same type being, or what roles do you think maybe those? You did mention, I believe, that the greeter's job is to help people transition. So do you think it was maybe that the greeter that you met way back when you were a kid?
no, I don't. I believe that when I was 8 years old, I believe I said that I just heard a voice.
I
I
see.
didn't see anybody. I saw no one in the room. I just heard the voice. In fact, that's what I called the voice. And I've heard the voice say several times, "Oh, that was nice. I think he's doing very well. Don't you think so?" Or, "No."
Hmm.
I've had that word a couple of times when I was getting ready to do something dangerous.
Hmm.
And it was a voice that was in my head that had no physical source, but I heard it so clearly, just
Mhm.
as if I'm talking to you now. That's what I heard when I was 8 years old. The
Okay.
greeter was very different, and he was dressed in white and spoke to me with the sounded like the same guy now that you think of it, but I don't think they were the same.
Okay, thank you for clarifying
Maybe
that.
that
We
was,
appreciate that. Mhm.
yeah. Okay.
Many people I know speak of voices that give them guidance, and sometimes they think of it as God or spirits of past relatives who've passed to the other side, higher selves, um, and they seem protective in nature, just like you just talked about, warning you about things. Do you have a feeling for where those things are coming from also? Are they more higher self level, or what would you say?
The majority of the voices that you hear in the head or the little nudgings that you get now and
Mhm.
then, and that's your higher self telling you something that's in your highest and best good. It's in your best interest to do this or don't do this, giving you guidance. That's what a lot of people call their inner compass,
Mm.
that kind of knowing that if I do this, bad things going to happen. Better not do that.
Mm.
That's your higher self speaking.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Dan?
Mhm.
Um, so how are you familiar with IONS, International
Very
Association
much,
for,
very
yeah.
much.
Do you happen to know Jackie Hutter? Like butter,
I,
except he spells it H-U.
you, you froze, Dan. Say that again.
Oh, do you know Jackie Hutter? She's a local person that I know of that's with IONS.
No, I don't. Is she with the Seattle Ions group?
Well, Thurston County. She lives here in
Thurston County.
Thurston.
I wasn't aware that there's a Thurston County Ions group.
Yeah, we should
I check
talk a little
in.
bit. We
Yeah,
should
I'd
talk
like
a little
to.
bit more about that. The other thing I was
I
gonna
check.
go ahead.
I was going to say I check in regularly with the Portland Ions group.
Yeah.
I seem to resonate with that group,
Mhm.
and they have a monthly Zoom meeting.
Hmm.
In fact, it was supposed to be tomorrow, but they canceled it because of weather. So we'll see them next month.
Yeah.
But I would like to know more about the Thurston County Ions group.
Well,
Do they Zoom?
let me tell you, um, they have been meeting in person, but I have a weird, I'm just a weirdo. That's the best description of me. And I run where I
Welcome.
live. Yeah, welcome. Where I live, I run something called Stranger Things, and it's just a group of people that get around once a month and talk about all this stuff. Jackie comes to that group. So if you're ever in Thurston County, if you can get up this way, it might be interesting to put you two together. Anyway, that's an
Well,
open invitation.
I would really like to, but I don't drive anymore. In fact, I don't drive. My
Mm.
wife
Yeah,
has to drive me everywhere because my legs just don't work.
Mm.
yeah, I've got
So
some
all of
similar
my meeting
issues.
now is with Zoom.
Zoom. Mhm. Well, the other thing I was going to ask about is, uh, and this is a conversation I've had with Jackie. So near-death experiences to me provide proof that consciousness doesn't reside in our brain or our body. It resides
Right.
elsewhere. And so kind of what I'm hearing you say is that conscious consciousness might be multidimensional. And that might be an explanation
Oh,
for,
yes,
yeah, okay.
exactly correct. There's your conscious awareness is only the third dimensional part of your consciousness.
Right.
The higher self is the fifth dimensional, the spiritual consciousness.
Mhm.
Okay. Where instead of competition, there's cooperation, there's unity.
Cooperation.
Another good source to read is the raw material, RA. It was channeled by Carla Nuckert. I can't remember her last Carla Ruckert. Yeah. Who's since transitioned. But the Law of One channelings speak about this dimensionality and the fact that as humanity begins to, if we could ever get rid of the wars and the chaos and the separation and let our souls experience what we have chosen to experience, which is unity, cooperation, and always every act, word, thought, and deed is in the highest and best good of all concerned. That's fifth dimensional consciousness. And that's the first step that we re-experience when we return to the spiritual world after physical death. So yeah, we live in many different dimensions of consciousness at the same time.
Kind of hard to wrap your head around to some
It is.
degree.
It is.
It is. Mhm.
Especially for an old engineer. My name
Yeah.
is
Well,
my
I
name
think
is Howard, and I am a recovering engineer.
congratulations on
Yes.
that. Yeah. So I think that's why these things are so hard to wrap our heads around in our conscious minds, as you say. We understand them when we have a higher level experience that goes with them, like a voice speaking to us or a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience. That is the way that we seem to have to be able to get over this 3D physical world that we live in, that can help us then to understand that. Those
I
things.
think Albert Einstein said it very succinctly. Knowledge is experience. Everything else is just information.
Mhm.
So in order to know something, to move beyond belief, in order to know something, you have to have experienced it. And what I've done today is given you what I know about my experience, not my belief, but my experience. It's now my knowledge. It's a part of my own truth because I've experienced it.
Mhm.
And that's also what I really have tried to give my students and clients is their own experience of their own spirituality, the higher dimensions to their awareness, their soul memories. The one of the programs, self-hypnosis programs that I developed, it's called Spiritual Journeys. It's documented in one of my books, but it begins by taking the client back to a past life, but not to just any past life, not the past life to correct their emotional uh, issue or whatever. This is a very pleasant past life, just to get the people that are not familiar with past life regression familiar with being and operating in that expanded state of awareness, a pleasant past life. And then the second session with that client would be to take them to their very first past life on Earth. Where were you? What did you do? How did you eat? Many of my clients' past lives are so instructive.
Mm.
Their voice, their vocabulary changes.
Mhm.
In some cases, the words that they use become so simplistic, they're not sophisticated at all. But anyway, after they experience their very first past life on Earth, then we go back even further into their soul memory. Okay, not your past life memories, but their soul memory now, to the very first time that they were aware in the spiritual realm that they are a separate being, a separate consciousness separate from Creator. Where did you go? What did you do? What are you supposed to do? What do you know at that point? And then the fourth session with that client, if they're willing, is to take them back into their very first awareness after the creation of their soul, still within the consciousness, the mind of Creator. What did they feel? What did they know there? Those are the kinds of experiences that teach them who and what they really truly are as a soul, as a separate spiritual being. And, that's one path in this self-hypnosis program. One of the other paths is spiritual healing. A different path could be exploration of the spiritual or Akashic records. Edgar Cayce's information came from what he called the Akashic records. And we've explored other worlds, and in one case, another universe.
Wow.
So it's all what that soul has experienced before. It's a permanent part of their soul's record. Mm-hmm. And ask and ye shall receive. Mm-hmm. If you ask the right question to the right source, the soul, they provide it. They provide what they have experienced before. And there's no similarity or very little similarity between regressed clients. Everyone is unique. Oh, sure, there's some similarities, depending on what they chose to experience in that past life. But it really hurt me to have to give up hypnotherapy because I enjoyed it so much. And it was so helpful to my clients. So anyway.
I want to be conscientious of our time here. I don't want to keep Howard or any of us so long that we transition to another
lifetime.
Lifetime. But I want to thank Howard for joining us today. Maybe he'll come back again. Gwen, do you have any kind of final question for Howard that we can deal with?
Well, I would like to say that the knowledge that Howard has shared here today and in his books and on the podcast is invaluable. But I would also say that it's important for us to remember that, as he just said, we are all unique souls and unique individuals. Our paths are unique, and this may not be the way for everyone, but it is definitely something that he has shared with many people and found some very interesting knowledge that he can share with the rest of us. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Howard, would you come back again? And I'd like to hear more about the ETs.
Certainly.
You've talked to. Okay.
Sure. Be glad to.
Okay. Gwen, do you want to give us a preview of coming attractions?
Sure.
Assuming there are.
Okay, let's see what we have coming up in Anomalies. So let's see. Next Friday, then January 19th, we have Rhonda Hall, who will be speaking with us. She's from Southern Arizona. She is a producer of UFO conferences. But interestingly, she is also a psychic medium. And she's done a lot of in-depth research into bloodlines, family lines, and genealogy. And she's going to share with us some very unique material that she has found. So that's going to be on the 19th, Friday the 19th. Then we're going to be jumping over to February. where we have Bob Farrell, Dr. Robert Farrell, who's going to talk to us about the Peruvian mummies. These are the ones that have been in the news recently, and he's done a lot of research. He's traveled down to that area, and he's an excellent speaker, so he'll be talking with us about that. I'm not sure, Dan, do we have any other ones that are on the books right now?
I'm working on a couple of them, but I haven't got commitments from anybody.
Okay.
Yeah. But we
Okay.
want to remind our listeners to like and subscribe to our channel because that's good for us. And Howard, once again, thank you very much for joining us. Hope we will connect down the road somewhere again.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And
If you,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Could
Thank you,
I-
Howard. Pleasure to meet you.
Good. Thank you.
Mhm.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you.
Mhm.